and welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Emil Story. How you doing, Emil?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks. Thanks so much for coming on to this podcast. The theme for today's show is entrepreneurship and sales, which is something that's in your blood, that's in your DNA. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this. And as sort of the backdrop and the introduction to you, I'll go back to, I think it was maybe 2010 when we were both starting the same positions at a company at the same time. We were
Yeah.
both sort of elected to start together on the same date for the same role. And this is the sort of primary difference, between you and me. I came into the days, starting the new job. I had a good night's sleep. I probably had a cup of tea or something. I read a book, and I slept early, and I made sure I was relatively on time. And then there's you. You came in swagging right in with this huge cup of coffee. You had just come from, I think, directly from a 1 week trip to Mexico. You had slept maybe like 2 hours, and you came and you just crushed it that year. You just, you hit the numbers and you've gone on to better things. So I wanted to ask you right off the top. A lot of people talk about, leaders and salespeople have sort of, having been born into this sort of mindset. So what are your thoughts on that? How did you sort of get into entrepreneurship and sales?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there maybe is some truth to that. I mean, you can, there's kind of a joke I really like. If you can't do, teach. And if you can't teach, sell. Um, and I think there's a little bit of truth to that in a funny way too, because I think sales in a way, you gotta be born with it, so to speak, right? Otherwise you end up looking like the skeezy sales guy who's like really trying to sell somebody, rather than, the person who's actually looking out for the other people's best interest. So how did I kind of get into it? Yeah, I mean, my background is actually in accounting. Subsequent post-secondary, I worked as a junior accountant for a little bit, and it didn't take me long to get out of that role simply because I realized that my personality is such that I need to be in front of people. So, with an accounting or even finance background, that kind of ended up pushing me into the bank. And that's where I really cut my teeth in a lot of in my business, I guess, really, and I got a lot of my background, financial experience, and of course, where you and I met.
Yeah. So then, I mean, if we're going back to, are you born a salesperson or, are you taught these things at an early age? I believe the primary influence will come from your environment and your caregivers, right? Being primarily your parents who are also in the business, right? So early on, you've got this programming, in terms of beliefs and mindset from them, right?
I mean, it's funny because I have three siblings. There's four of us, and we are so my parents are in real estate, and thus naturally are salespeople, and so to an extent we all had a very similar upbringing with respect to the influence, the sales influence, and I think that at the very least, the lot of us, the lot of myself and my siblings, we do have a modicum of sales background, but it's not. I don't think it's really been automatic per se. Do you know what I mean? Like it's certainly, maybe it makes it easier. It's like, I don't know, if my dad was a chemist, and I decided to get into chemistry, it would probably be easier because I could bounce some of my ideas and thoughts and feelings off of him. But I would still have to do the work to learn chemistry. You know what I mean? So I think I think it's similar to sales. I think you are either born with it or not. I think, it's again, I know you're a musician just the same. So it's kind of like rhythm, I guess you could call it that, where some people just have rhythm. They can pick up an instrument and like, okay, figure out how to play along and figure out that rhythm. And then some people don't,
Yeah.
where they just, no matter what, they're going to hit the drums or play the guitar, and it might even sound good. They might have practiced a long time, but nevertheless, they're going to have a hard time finding the rhythm, to the music. I think it's the same thing with the sales business. It's one of those things where you got to have that sales skill, that rhythm. You got to be born with that, so to speak. But then, of course, being born with it, if you are born with it, you still have to, go back and study chemistry, if you will. In other words, you still have to, hone those skills, So it's a little bit of, I think to answer your question in a very long-winded way, which is my normal fashion. It's a bit of both. You got to be born with it, but then you need to have the environment in order to cultivate that skill.
No, I really like that answer because, like you're saying, you're born with it. You grow up getting sort of the familiarity with it, which means you've got a slight bit of a head start than someone who has zero experience and might not be born with it. But then you do have to do the work because you're not born with the periodic table in your mind, right? Like you have to learn the elements and go through the motions of educating yourself on the principles of chemistry, etc. That was the line. And I'm thinking of Bruce Lipton, who's got that book Biology of Belief, and it's a great book for epigenetics. And his whole concept is people are born with certain genetic coding in their DNA. And some people believe this is not just for, the color of your hair, the features of, your body, etc. It's also emotional imprints, past life imprints, they get into sort of that category. So then you're born with sort of this genetic coding, but then the environment and your, initial environment being your house and your caregivers, they have the ability to turn that switch on as well, So there's the born part of it, but then there's the switching on part of those genes. Because he's done some experiments to show that even if you're born with certain genes, say, for example, cancer, that might not necessarily turn on depending on the environment and, the thoughts you give to it. So I think you're right. It's a good blend of being born with it, getting familiar with it, but then actually doing the work to excel at it, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. There's a fun little thought experiment that I find. It's maybe a little slightly off topic, but it still correlates nevertheless. But there's a thought experiment that I find very intriguing, actually, and that's the notion of, so if you take Einstein or Isaac Newton is a real good one. He wrote the Principia or Principia. I don't know the correct pronunciation, but he wrote this book on calculus, right? And it's very funny because it veritably was part of it. It's part of his life's work. Again, I repeat that, his life's work. Now we go to school, and now, of course, you're fast forwarding, eons, generations, but we go to school and we learn this same stuff in a matter of a couple years. Now, obviously, to perfect and master it, you apply it, say with astrophysics, or again back to the chemistry thing, or whatever, it takes a lot. It takes a lot more, but at least from a basic principle standpoint, we can figure it out in a couple of years. Again, this is someone's life work. So it really does. I guess what comes to mind is like, well, the notion of is now a bit of calculus, or a bit of, Isaac Newton's findings now in our genetics, in our DNA. Could that be the case? And so I find, I don't know, it's just a very interesting thought process, a very interesting topic for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm with that. I feel we're always standing on the shoulders of giants, and that's how we're evolving, right?
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's I don't want to get too crazy out there, but I mean, once we really dissect or decode the genetic code, DNA I think, and I don't mean in general, I mean in like with a, very specifically, like, to your point, like looking at, this person has cancer genes, or this person has, leukemia genes, or this person is prone to running faster, because of their genes. These things, once we can kind of pinpoint those, I wonder if we'll actually find, to your point, little things like, hey, if we alter this gene, can we make someone better at math? you know
Yeah.
and if it and then that leads us to the question, if the answer is in fact yes, which my personal belief is, I'm erring on the side of, I believe that we probably will find that, but if the answer is in fact yes, then that leads us to, that's probably gonna, that veritably answers yes to the other question, which is, the reason we can figure out that calculus, or at least the basic principles of calculus, in a couple of years rather than an entire lifetime, and simply because what Isaac Newton did actually impact things on a genetic level, because the human race started studying this kind of math, and it started being passed down, and learned easier and easier and easier, and worked its way into our code.
Correct. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, with someone like Elon Musk, we're talking about sales and now entrepreneurship. Everyone revels Elon as one of the greatest entrepreneurs and thinkers of our time in, multi industries. And he's a maverick. And if you study actually his grandparents, they were mavericks too, even on a higher level than him. And I say that relatively because, of the resources they had at the time. From briefly what I read about them, these were people who, when they moved, they would actually fly a small Cessna. That was their car, back then. So when they moved, they actually packed all their stuff into the Cessna, and then they sort of moved homes that way. And they would use that Cessna for going on road trips, whereas, we might use, cars on a common level. So they were mavericks, they did things like, immigrate to other countries. And so I think that Elon gets a lot of his fire from his grandparents. So there must be something in that DNA that passes through, and then, you can evolve and become bigger and better from it, for sure.
Well, I don't know if you remember that movie Gattaca. I think it's the late 80s. Did you ever see that?
No.
All right. So I can't remember it was relatively famous actors. I can't remember which ones it was exactly, but Gattaca, obviously Gattaca is Gattaca, is the makeup of our genetic code. And the basic premise of this movie is that people who are born, now wealth does play a factor into it, but people basically are born, when they're born rather, their genetic code can go, you sit down with the genetic counselor and you can change the eye color, or and basically do exactly that, change the Ethan Hawke, I think, was in it. But you can change these details to go, oh, well, I want this guy would be predetermined to be, an athlete, or is going to be predetermined to be, a scientist, or this kind of thing. And you can kind of pick all those things. So it is kind of funny. And it just reminded me, when you mentioned Elon Musk and his upbringing and all that, it just reminded me of this kind of thing, because in a way, it's, don't get me wrong, it's very fearful. I'm very fearful of this becoming a real thing for a number of reasons. But in a way, it's true. It also supports your original question and the original inference, right? Insofar that, hey, yes, I have sales in my blood. My parents were salespeople. So thus, it made it a little bit easier for me to become a salesperson, I think. Similar for Elon Musk, his parents were outside of the box thinkers, doers, movers, shakers, that, to your point, I'm going to use what you just said, we're jumping on planes and flying around and doing all these crazy outside of the box things that you can imagine that impacted his foresight, or his way to think. Think about it like this. Myself personally, I spent a lot of my youth in the forest, flipping over rocks, looking at salamanders and stuff like that, right? And maybe talking to people and doing that kind of thing. Elon Musk probably spent a lot of his youth, jumping on planes. And you got to think about what are you thinking about when that happens? And as a kid, you're daydreaming, you're being creative, your creative mind is going nuts. So my creative mind, when talking to friends or flipping rocks, might have been, correlated to, oh, what does this do? Or what is this, yeah, what does this do? But his, on the other hand, very well might have been, oh, imagine this. Imagine this would take us to space. Imagine we could fly up, and maybe that helped contour his, current thought processes.
Yeah. He was highly focused from the outset. And I even remember seeing an interview with Cristiano Ronaldo, and when they asked him about his son, who is sort of like, he trains him in soccer and exercise and things like that. And they said, will he be a great soccer player like you? Does he have it? And, it was a very interesting answer. Cristiano told them that, he has the potential, but he has to put in a lot of hard work, right? Which is sort of summarizing what we've been talking about. And for him to say that, he's his own son, he's got the genes, he's got the environment, the education that he needs to become, a great soccer player. But again, he has to put in the hard work. If I can ask you, so I remember once I was asking you some techniques about sales and things like that, and you were mentioning how it builds character, when you do sort of like the sales activities. And really, I don't want this podcast to be specifically for people who are in the entrepreneurial and sales industry, because I think regular people can apply some of these principles to their daily lives. It's, it's fully implementable that way. What are some of the good things you see when you do sales, or you've learned from sales?
The first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is face your fears. Okay. And I know it's a really funny thing to say, but it's true. Face your fears. So I mentioned this to you, I think eons ago, a decade ago, or so, when I started in this gig and, started selling mortgages, basically. When I started my business, the thing I did was I went out and went door knocking, because I realized that everybody around me was kind of trying to, we're going to try and create an internet presence, or we're going to do this, and I went, you know what, shit, the easiest way to get out there and get in front of people is literally just to get out there and get in front of people. Don't knock on doors. And for a lot of people in this world, I can tell you right now, the amount of when I tell people that, they kind of go, what's wrong with you? Right. And it's just funny, because for a lot of people, that thought of going out there and knocking on doors is frightening. You're going to be told to get off the porch front. You're going to be told to, but here's the thing is that, especially in this kind of, really in any walk of life, it's kind of funny. If you can get any job to go knock on doors, it'll really help you, I think, because you can't control the questions that are being asked. And you also can't control the time that you have to respond. Right. So when someone says, what are you doing here? You got to come up with a pretty quick response that's going to save face, that's going to make you still look good, that's going to be non-offensive, and that's going to ideally still pique the client's interest, or the potential client's interest. So the first thing that comes to mind is face your fears, because at the end of the day, look, it's not that going door knocking is natural for me or was super easy for me either. I was like, I'm not going to lie, the first couple of people that opened the door, I was like, oh yeah, I didn't even have a script prepared. Probably like I had two heads, but nevertheless, it was about facing that fears and getting comfortable with just conversing with random people that I didn't know before. The second thing that comes to mind is be the black sheep. So here's the thing is if you got this flock of sheep, let's say, I don't know, 1,000 sheep, and, they're all white, whatever. You got this one black sheep in the middle. They stand out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
Well, especially in sales, but really in any walk of life, in any business, you kind of want to be that black sheep. Everybody's so afraid. You can see it like this. Okay. It happens in social media. So let's say you post up something. Let's say Croy, you decide you're going to post up a post about a political post. Okay. You throw it up there and there's no response. There's no nothing. The reason is nobody wants to get involved. Nobody wants to put themselves out there. Nobody wants to. But then as soon as one person does, now the next person does, and the next, and the next, and the next. We get this trickle effect, and a conversation can start out of it. An online or media conversation can start out of this. Sure. But it's that first person that needs to be that black sheep that needs to do this. And this is a very funny thing, because if you're an entrepreneur in business, one of the biggest, proponents to a successful business, in a lot of business, not everyone, but a lot of businesses, is being first to market.
Yeah.
Right. It's so important to do these little things that make you stand out. And so I go back to me door knocking again. Nobody door knocks. I guarantee if you went and asked, let's use the same thing, 1,000 mortgage brokers, hey, have you gone door knocking for business? You might have one that says yes.
Yeah, it's not traditional in our industry. I mean, realtors do it, insurance people do it, newspaper people do it, but for mortgages, no, it's not traditional.
Well, it's very funny you say that, because that became one of my lines. They'd open the door and go, hey, my name's Emil Story. Don't worry, I'm not a real estate agent. And you know what? I say that in all jest, in all fairness. Like, I have obviously nothing against real estate agents. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, my parents are in real estate. I love real estate agents. I love salespeople in general. But yeah, that would be my kind of fun, quippy pickup line.
Oh, no, that's awesome. And then, like keeping into sales and getting into entrepreneurship, the two are very different, but the two are also connected if you want it to be. I remember, in our business, winter months used to be slow. And I'm saying used to because, these days, every month is exciting. Yeah. January and February was usually downtime. And being new in the sort of, commission role, the fear would come up, right? I don't have much business during January and February. And, we'd get worried. And then that mindset would also sort of, develop momentum, and it might affect your March and April months, getting into spring, and you'd have to sort of catch up. But remember, you told me once you went to your dad and you said, listen, what's happening and nothing's going on. What should I do? And he said, take a month off.
Yeah. Well, he didn't say take a month off. I think taking a month off of work would literally kill the man. Lord knows I wouldn't fare too well if I took a month off either. But yeah, he said, go on vacation. I said, excuse me? He says, get out, go, leave the country, go on vacation. I said, what? And, my dad is a very learned man. He's read a lot of, in fact, I inherited a lot of them. And quite frankly, I've read a lot of them as well. The Napoleon Hills, the Zig Ziglars, the Anthony Robbins or Tony Robbins, these kind of motivational books.
Yeah.
And there's a funny thing. I think it's Zig Ziglar, actually. You probably find it online. There's a really funny thing that's always kind of resounded with me. And my dad was the guy, we'd be driving in the car and we'd be listening to Zig Ziglar on the radio, and I'd be like, can we put on some music, please? And he'd be like, no, quiet, I want to hear this, right? Mm-hmm. At the time I didn't get it, but nowadays, back to what we originally started this with, the environment, right? It really did create that sales environment, so to speak, and allow me to, develop those skills faster. But nevertheless, Zig Ziglar, what he would always say, he says, it's really funny when you're sitting at work and you're like, geez, when I get home, I gotta do the dishes, and I gotta clean the table, and I gotta make sure the food's made, and I gotta do this, and I gotta do this, and I gotta do this. And then when you're at home, you're like, shoot, you know what? I gotta be at the office. I gotta get this stuff done. I got so much on my mind. And Zig Ziglar kind of went on to say, he's like, isn't it so funny that our minds are in the wrong place? He says, we got to get our minds in the right place at the right time. So when you're at work, you're laser focused on work, and you're not worried about the dishes or making dinner for the kids or any of that at home. And then when you're at home, you're not worried about your work because you spent so much time focusing on that. And he's like, as long as we can, as soon as we can come to that realization and kind of align our minds, we cut down on this, internal mental chatter, and B, a byproduct of that is we just get a lot more done. Yeah. Right. So, it's
it's a very contrarian answer. And, my natural inclination would be, okay, do more work, right? If you've got a low month, but for him to say sort of, get off there, reset your mind and get back in the game.
Well, because here's the thing is in sales or entrepreneurship, it's very difficult to take any time off.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like for the minute you, to your point, you take your foot off the gas, you feel like you lose that momentum. And I really strongly say, feel like you lose that momentum. But the thing is that we do need breaks as human beings. Like, I mean, how many times have you heard, when you die, nobody cares about how much money you had, you know what I mean? Or that kind of thing, or how hard you worked. Nobody cares about that. Well, there's truth to it. So you're working so hard to build this up and make all this money, but for what? If you're not going out and enjoying it, there's just no point. So I think that was kind of, in a way, what my dad was kind of getting at, where, he said, when he was saying, yeah, go take this vacation, take a break, he's not saying, okay, stop working. He's saying, well, if there's no business right now, don't kill yourself trying to get business. Stay focused, stay on that and following that Zig Ziglar mentality that, okay, well, there's no business right now. So go take some time off and put your mind there in the time off, and then come back, and be refreshed and start focusing on business and cultivating business and back into that mindset. Instead of basically what a lot of us do as salespeople is, we find ourselves, to your point, in that, oh, it's a slow month. Oh, and you get in this mindset where you're like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I got to get business. If I don't get business, I'm not going to be able to pay the bills. If I can't pay the bills again, this is negative. This is negative self-talk. It's negative. It doesn't cultivate positivity. So when you get stuck in that kind of whirlwind of negativity, you got to get out of it. And the best way to get out of it, I think, is just extrapolate yourself from the situation. Pull yourself out of it. Go take a break, and come back with a refreshed mind, so you can again go back to that. I'm sitting at work. I'm going to focus on work. When I go home, I'm going to focus on home.
Correct. Yeah. There are some people who, once again, I think I remember reading or seeing an interview with Elon Musk where he doesn't even sort of, entertain thinking about aliens, because his whole concept is, when I see an alien, then, I'll do something about it, which is the opposite of his Mars mission, because, he's not waiting for us to have a plan B to go to Mars. He's going on the outset. And some people don't even think of, things that are not related to their current goal, because like you're saying, they're super focused and they're keeping the energy of their thinking on the task at hand, right? Because it's a waste of a resource otherwise.
Well, that's it, and I do respect that. I think it is funny. But I do more so than anything, because personally, the way that I unwind, some people might watch TV or, exercise or the like. The way that I personally unwind best is just by having conversations with people. And the more outside of the box or zany that those conversations can get, the generally speaking, the more I'll unwind even. So I wholly respect the notion there with Elon Musk not wanting to talk about aliens, but personally, I think it's a very fun topic to discuss. Perhaps not on this podcast this morning, but
Open that portal with you.
Yeah.
If I can ask you, so again, just finally relating it to sales and entrepreneurship, the work that we do is uncertain. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, and that's the reason we do that work. There's sort of some excitement to that, something we're drawn to. What would you say to the people out there who might be sales and entrepreneurs and who also might not be in that field, but are still sort of, still facing the fears of the unknown? And, some things would be like, I've done 100 cold calls, I haven't made a sale, or, I'm trying to get this job, I haven't sort of got that job, or, with my kids, I'm trying to, get them to go a certain direction, they're not in that place yet. What sort of advice would you give them to sort of not only face their fears, but maybe some sort of strategy to, envelop?
Well, you know what? I'm going to actually go back to, what my dad, one of the things, so we talked about what my dad's recommendation was at the beginning when I started my business. Okay. And that was take a vacation. Now, I gotta preface this by saying one thing we didn't talk about is the when. When did he give me that advice? And I think that's a very important piece here. It's going to really correlate in here. Well, but when I started my business, I was working 16, 18 hours a day. Okay. I didn't have kids at the time. So I really was laser focused on this business and really focused on getting it done. And I think I'd come into a bit of a rut there where, I made those 100 or closer to 1,000 phone calls, or maybe 2,000 cold calls anyway. But I had made all those cold calls, and I was pushing so hard to try and get this business done and to try and like grow this business as fast as possible and really make money, because that was my primary goal. And so I think in a way, another piece of this take a break, take a vacation, was to step away from it and refresh the mind, as we had already talked about, but then come back with a different mindset.
Nice.
So yeah, exactly. So I'm not suggesting, take a vacation or take a break. And for what it's worth, I did take a break at that time. I think I flew down south for 7 days or whatever, just at an all-inclusive, and did nothing but, well, probably hurt my brain, but anyway, basically the gist is that, if you continuously go to job interviews and you're not getting that job, or, you're out there and you can't make the sale, in any industry, or, kids is a different one. But I think it still does actually apply, because, if you keep trying to get your kids to do something, and I have 2 kids, as you know, as well. But if you keep trying to get your kids to do something and they just won't comply no matter what. I think the global advice in this given situation is take a step back and try and go at it from another angle. So maybe that's like take a day, especially with kids, you can't take a week, but maybe it's take a day and, maybe try saying yes to most things for a day. Right. Maybe that's the case. Maybe you say no to most things. When it comes to the job interviews, maybe take a step back and analyze what you're doing and where it goes wrong, and try and figure that part out. And really try and go on more job interviews, try and get more job interviews so you can get out there and basically get practice. I mean, practice doesn't in fact make perfect, right? I think with everything in life, and interviewing is just that. It's, it's something that needs to be practiced. And then when it comes to sales, I mean, let's say you're a black sheep like me, and you went out and you started door knocking right off the hop, and you're not getting any business from it. Well, don't keep doing it. If it's not working for you, don't keep doing it. Try something else. Maybe. See, here's I'll tell you a truth, is that if I jumped online and tried to, build my business online, I to be honest, personally, I don't think I do. I'm not that great at. I'm not that tech savvy. So I think personally, I'd run into issues with it as well. But maybe there's somebody, maybe you, as in the listeners, maybe you are better at that than most. Maybe you're really good at making, advertising JPEGs or that kind of thing, or, Photoshop or something like that. And you can make some things that really pop and stand out and that really draw attention to you that help you sell. But basically at the end of the day is try something different. I think if go back to science, it was Einstein that said, insanity is trying the same thing day in, day out and expecting a different result. Right.
No, that's awesome. So I like that. That's great advice. You're saying take a step back, come back with a different mindset. And if it's not working for you, find something that does work for you, something that's unique to your voice, which will come out, and, you'll find purpose from that, and you'll flourish naturally. You won't feel that you're doing work.
Yeah. And you know what? And in a way, admit what you are too. Like I all throughout growing up, I fought it. I didn't want to be a salesperson. I didn't want to be a salesperson. I'm not a salesperson. I can catch myself saying, I'm better than that. I'm better than being a salesperson. I got to be better than that. And, it's really funny. Once I, at that time acquiesced to the fact that I was in fact a salesperson, holy shit, did I ever start selling like crazy. And that's because that's what I'm good at. So, to know what you're good at, you also need to know what you're not good at. So it's one of those things, if you continuously go and you're trying to sell and you're trying to sell and you're trying to sell and you're not doing a good job, I mean, it doesn't hurt to stop and take a look and go, well, maybe my skill set is better suited at, I don't know, managing, or better suited at, science or something like that. Do you know what I mean? So find what you're good at and then propel, use that as fuel.
Got it. Wow. Listen, this is amazing. Thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your mindset, your philosophy, some of your great advice. And you're the kind of person, I know this podcast we spoke on, sales and entrepreneurship, but I know someone like you, we can also speak on music, and we can speak volumes on astrophysics and metaphysics and things like that. So maybe if you're open to it, on a later date, we can sort of re-engage with some of those topics. But once again, thanks again for coming on the show, and I wish you well in your business.
Nah, thanks a lot, Roy. I had a great time. I look forward to those next times.
Okay, pleasure.
Ciao.